It's been really encouraging morning so far. Just to introduce myself for those who don't know me, my name's Darryl. I'm one of the leaders here in the church, and we just want to welcome everybody here this morning. It's the summer season, so the preacher gets to preach on his own subject, and I've chosen that Nehemiah. It's one of my favorite books. It's one of my favorite accounts, and I think it fits in very well as to where we are as a church, but also fits in very well, and I don't think this is any accident, to what Phil was speaking to us, do you remember last week, about giants, about problems, about obstacles, about putting a faith and a trust in God that He can do everything. All things with Him are possible. So, as we look at Nehemiah, I want to first of all to ask you to cast your mind back 160 years. 106. Hands up here can remember. Now, come on, some of you. No. 160 years. It was 1857. What happened? Does anybody have any idea what happened in 1857? Who was on the throne in 1857? Was it Queen Victoria? Indeed, Queen Victoria. Anything else happen in 1857? No? Let me give you a hint. This next one. Gayette's medicated paper for the water closet. Toilet paper was invented in 1857. Where would we be without the great inventions of the 19th century? This is one for Ken and Royston. Do you remember this? The London General Omnibus first ran in 1857. Did you know that, Royston? Yes, with horses. Wow, there you go. And finally, this is a trick question. The oldest football club in the world. What is it? It's not Notts County. Notts County is the oldest professional league club in the world, but Sheffield FC is the oldest football club in the world. Check it out. Not to be confused with Sheffield Wednesday or Sheffield Thursday. Sheffield FC. They're still in existence, but they're amateur league. So check them out. 160 years. That is indeed a long time. We're going to look at Nehemiah chapter 1. But in Nehemiah chapter 1, the story actually begins 160 years earlier. So here's the thing. God's people, the chosen people, have been promised this promised land. They've come in across the Red Sea into this and the desert into this promised land. And he says to his people, he says, if you will be faithful to me and obey me, I'll be with you. You will live in the land flowing with milk and honey, and I will be your God, and you will live in the land, and you will be successful and prosperous. But he said, but if you disobey me, and if you follow other gods, then I will punish you. And there are a series of curses threatened to bring down on his chosen people. One of them is this, the curse that you and your king, whom you set over you, I will bring you to a nation that neither you nor your fathers have known. And this happened in the year 605 BC when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came and besieged and captured Jerusalem, and he took into exile a lot of the people that were in Jerusalem, including the likes of Daniel, and they were brought off to Babylon, and there they sang, by the rivers of Babylon. Do you remember that one? Boney M. There we sat down, and there we wept when we remembered Zion, Jerusalem, God's city. So they were off in Babylon, but Babylon, 70 years later, fell to the king Cyrus the Great of Persia, and the Persian Empire was in control. And Cyrus actually let all of those Israeli captives, they said, well, you can go back now, you can go back to your own country. But actually, they didn't go back to their own country. That was after 70 years of exile. A lot of them still remained in exile for yet another 90 years. And this is where we are with Nehemiah in Babylon. Just flick up the next picture. in Babylon, which is on the extreme right there, which is modern-day Iraq and Iran, on the border between Iraq and Iran, hundreds and hundreds of miles away from their home in Jerusalem. 160 years from the original exile to where we are here now in Nehemiah. Our message today is a message about doing great things for God. And Stuart has shared a little bit about the vision that we have as a church, the vision that we have to reach out into the community, to have facilities that are going to be able to help us to minister to the community, to be able to have sufficient capacity so that on a Sunday morning, this place, normally when it's not summer, this place is, you will struggle to get a seat. But we really want to lay that before God, and we've got a vision. But I also want you to think, as we think through this passage, about your own personal vision. What great things is God laying on your heart? And some of you, especially young people, you've come back from camp, you're probably buzzing, you're probably excited, you're probably enthused about what God might want you to do. Some of you might be thinking about career options, about education options, about university options. Others of us might be thinking about maybe a ministry change, doing something new for God, changing what we do. We might be thinking of a job change that's going to lead us into a different realm. Whatever it is that God is laying on your heart, as we go through this passage, let the Holy Spirit work in your heart to point out things that God has got in store for you. Father God, we just pray that as we look at this passage, that you would touch our lives, that we would let you into our hearts, that we would want to hear your voice and obey. Please do this. We ask it in Jesus' name, for his glory. Amen. Right. This talk is going to be a bit bish-bash-bosh. Nehemiah's got loads in it, the first 2 chapters especially, so we're going to run through really, really quickly. So if you're taking notes, get your pen out, get your pad out, whatever you're taking the notes on, and ready to go. So first of all, let's look at Nehemiah. Let's look at what we can learn from him and his character. First of all, Nehemiah's heart. Nehemiah's heart. What about Nehemiah's heart? Let me just read those first few verses again. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanai, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, "Those who survived the exile are back in the province and are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, its gates have been burned with fires." And when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Nehemiah's heart. Nehemiah had a heart for people. He had a heart for his people. He questioned his brothers about the people that were left there in Jerusalem, that were in disgrace. He had a heart for people, but he also had a heart for the city of God itself. He had a heart for Jerusalem. He asked, we can see there in verse 3, verse 2, he asked about not just the people, but also about Jerusalem. But most importantly, Nehemiah had a heart for God. And I think you can tell a lot about a person from the way that they react when something bad happens. What do they turn to? What do they focus on when something negative comes into their lives? Do they start complaining? Do they start whinging? Do they start blaming other people? Nehemiah turned to God. So when he heard these things, verse 4, he says, I sat down and wept and mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. That was his heart. That was where he turned when he was in trouble. So Nehemiah's heart. Nehemiah's prayer, and this is probably what I want to spend the most time on this morning. Nehemiah's prayer, verses 4 down to verses 10, which Stuart has read for us. Notice this, first of all. Nehemiah's prayer was persistent prayer. Do you see what it says in verse 6 there? Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night. This is persistent prayer. It's not just a quick once-off. Persistently praying day and night. And did you notice that when we read that, it's talked about in the month of Kislev? This is when it all starts off. Kislev is about November time. And if you notice then the first verse of the next chapter, this is when Nehemiah finishes praying, it says, in the month of Nisan. That is about springtime, sort of March, April time. So Nehemiah has been praying from November through to March, April, day and night. That is indeed an example in persistent prayer, isn't it? But it's not just persistence. He's praying real prayer. Real prayer. What is real prayer? Real prayer, sometimes I feel we come to God and we pray and we say the same things and we're not really, our head's not really in it. Sometimes I know I just say things by rote, or I say bless, 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 and it's not real. It's not affecting me. It's not affecting my emotions. But here we see that this is real. It is genuine. He weeps. He mourns. He fasts. I think the best prayer meetings I have ever been at are those prayer meetings when we come to God in complete dependence on Him, declaring that there is nothing that we can do. We need Him. We are desperate for Him to intervene in a particular situation, and we call out to God with everything we have in our. That is real prayer indeed. Next, confession in prayer. You can see in verses 6 and 7 that Nehemiah confesses. And when we come to prayer, we need to remember just who God is and just who we are. We need to put Him in His place, that He is the exalted one, and we know that we are without Him nothing. We have to confess our failures and confess the things that we have done wrong. And sometimes I don't think we do that enough in this church and as individuals. There's one individual here in this church, it's John Fallows, and regularly in communion, and this morning again in communion, he did it again. He stood up and he prayed, and he confessed to God on behalf of the church that we are not the people that we ought to be. And that puts God in His place, and it puts us in our place, and realigns our understanding of just who He is, just who we are, and just how much we need Him. But the other thing that Nehemiah did is he prayed in God's will. Let me read these verses again, verses 8 and 10 again. Praying in God's will. So, remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. What is going on here? He's saying to God, remember your promises. Remember your instruction. Has God forgotten? Does Nehemiah feel the need to say, hey, God, you remember what you said you'd done? Wake up, God. And it's not that at all, is it? So what is going on here? I think there's something going on here that is really fundamental, that any time we see in the Bible a men and women of God praying to God and saying, Lord, remember, we're not trying to get God to remember, but what we're doing is we are praying things that God has already stated is His will. We are aligning our thoughts to God's will. So if we can pray something and then say, God, you've promised it, that is praying in His will, praying in His name. And when we pray prayers that we know are in the will of God, those are the most powerful prayers we can ever pray. So we need to remember to pray in line with his will. Next point then is Nehemiah's vision. We have Nehemiah's heart. We've had Nehemiah's prayer. Now let's have a look at Nehemiah's vision. Now, Nehemiah's vision, he doesn't actually articulate his vision until quite far down in this process. We're looking at chapter 2 and verse 5, and it's only then that Nehemiah says, I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Jerusalem where my ancestors are buried, and here's his vision, so I can rebuild it. That's his vision. He wants to rebuild Jerusalem. What an amazing vision. And I think there's something really important here in vision. And understanding what vision is, I think is really important. Vision simply is seeing something that doesn't yet exist. Seeing something that doesn't yet exist. And there's a question here, I think, that needs to be answered, and that is, why, if after 70 years of captivity, when Cyrus the Great says, you can all go back to Jerusalem now, why did nobody do that and go back and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem? It was 90 years later, and nobody had gone back to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem until Nehemiah. Why? And I think the answer is simply because nobody had the vision. Nobody had the vision to go and do that thing. They didn't see it. What did they see? They saw 160 years of rubble and decay and mess and a shambles. It was too hard. It was too big. They didn't see it, but Nehemiah saw it. But notice this. Nehemiah's vision only emerges in halfway through chapter 2. Nehemiah's vision was only manifested itself after 5 months of prayer. After he had been seeking and fasting and mourning and laying himself before God. Nehemiah did not wake up one morning and say, God, I've got a great vision, please bless it. Nehemiah came to God and sought his face over a period of time. And gradually God gave him the vision to rebuild Jerusalem. But Nehemiah had a problem. What was Nehemiah's problem? In brief, he had no permission to go and build the walls of Jerusalem. He had a job to do for the king, a very important job. The king wasn't going to let him go. Nehemiah had no resource. He had no workforce. He had no permission. And Nehemiah had no qualifications. Nehemiah was used to the fine palace life with the king and everything in the royal court. He wasn't used to getting his hands dirty and building walls. He was the last person that probably would be the right person to do this. But still, God had given Nehemiah this vision. So despite all these problems, Nehemiah, we see in chapter 2, we see Nehemiah taking action. And what does he do? He steps out in faith. Nehemiah's action. He steps out in faith. He comes before the king. He's got a sad face on. He hadn't been sad in the presence of the king before. He's deliberately sad so that the king would notice and say, Nehemiah, what's up? That was a dangerous thing to do. You could have had your head chopped off in those days for coming into the king in a grumpy state. But the king goes to Nehemiah and he says, Nehemiah, what is it you want? What an amazing question. The king asking Nehemiah, what is it you want? And Nehemiah asks. So he takes action and he asks. And he asks big. He doesn't just say, do you mind okaying if I just nip down to Jerusalem for a couple of weeks and I'll be back again very shortly? He doesn't. He says to the king, King, can you please let me go to Jerusalem? Can you please give me letters to the governor of Trans-Euphrates so that I can have safe conduct? Can I please have a letter to the keeper of the forest so I can have timber? And Nehemiah asks big. And what happens? The last point is not about Nehemiah at all. It's about God. It's about God's provision. God provides. Whatever you're thinking in terms of building, doing things for God, we need to realize actually that only God can do what only God can do. It's all about God. It's not about us. Please remember, doing great things for God is not about us. And here we see a foreign king with his heart completely changed and turned around, and God working miraculously in the heart of that king to provide all of those things that Nehemiah needs. But God provides not just in changing the heart of the king. He doesn't just do that. He doesn't just let Nehemiah go and giving him all of the stuff that he needs. God also then works in the hearts of a stubborn people that have no vision to get them to start working, to give them the desire and the passion to join Nehemiah with this vision, to come together as a nation to do this fantastic building project. Nehemiah didn't have a workforce. Who ended up in that workforce? If we look further on in this book, we see amazing things happening. We see the people building this wall. Who are these people? If you read in chapter 3, priests and Levites, I don't think they're used to building walls, are they? You can see further on, goldsmiths and perfume makers. Building walls? Really? God provided the right people at the right time. These were no ordinary walls. These were 5 stories high, 2.5 meters wide, and 4 kilometers long. Solid walls. Yet perfume makers ended up building walls. Only God can do that. Finally, let's just look at how we can apply that now to our lives. Lessons from Nehemiah. How can we apply that into our situation for this church as we look to create a vision for the future for God, as we look to do great things for God? How can you, in your lives and the decisions you have to make, how can you apply these lessons to the great things that you want to do for God? Very quickly. And if you remember nothing else, remember this one thing now. The pattern of Nehemiah is to pray, to wait, and to act. Whatever it is that you're thinking of doing for God, pray, wait, act. Some of us are great prayers, but if we never act, then nothing's going to happen. God chooses to use us to do his will. Isn't that amazing? Sometimes some of us pray and then straight away we're into it. No, wait. Give God time to reveal his will, to do his thing. And some of us are great at acting, but we actually sometimes forget to pray. So here's the pattern for Nehemiah. For everything that we do, pray, wait, act. Number 2, make sure your vision, whatever it is in line with God's vision. Very often we see a project, we get excited, we want to do something, and off we go. But actually, that's not God's vision at all. Is your vision actually God's vision, or is it just a pet hobby horse of ours? Next, ask big. Our God is a great big God. Ask big. There's no end to what we can ask our God from if we are asking in his will. Ephesians tells us that now, to him who is able to do infinitely more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power at work, is at work within us, to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations. Where on earth are we, as a church, going to get £800,000 to do that renovation? Let's call it £1 million. We're going to ask God. And as we ask God, this is the next point, we're going to expect the unexpected. We very often have an idea as to how things are all going to work out. God usually has a different angle. He usually surprises us. And we think, whoa, I didn't see that coming. Expect, church, the unexpected. Did Nehemiah ever think that the answer to all Israel's problems would be actually start with a foreign king, giving him permission and giving him all those? I don't think the Israelites would have thought that. I don't think Nehemiah would have thought that at the beginning. But he did. Expect the unexpected. Next, expect the supernatural. If we're going to do anything for God, we've got two choices. We can do it in our own strength, or we can do it in his power. If it's in our own strength, that's what Paul says, the flesh. Paul says, I have no confidence in the flesh. I have no confidence in my flesh. If we want to do anything for God, we must expect to see the supernatural and call on God to do his thing and work miracles in our lives and in the lives of those around us. The song that Phil taught us last week on the video said, every giant will fall. The mountains will move. Every chain of the past you've broken into. Over fear, over lies, we're singing the truth that nothing is impossible with you. And I was so glad that we sang that song just before I came up here. We said, by faith, this mountain shall be moved, and the power of the gospel will proclaim. For we know all things are possible for those who call on his name. Let's expect to see God working supernaturally in our lives in this place. But if you look right at the very end of Nehemiah chapter 2 and verse 10, after he's been given permission and he's been given everything that he wants from the king, verse 10 says, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. And here we see the first signs of opposition. Expect opposition. And as we read through the rest of Nehemiah, we see opposition creeping up to stop this great work. Opposition from within, opposition from outside, opposition from Satan. And you ask any of the leaders of any of the ministries in this church today, and they will tell you that they see opposition in those ministries. Whatever we are going to do, church, individuals, you will have opposition. You will have people who don't want you to do. You will have Satan who doesn't want you to do great things for God. Expect opposition, but meet it head on and meet it with confidence. Finally, keep on praying. This wasn't just about Nehemiah praying for 5 months and then everything was fine. As we read the rest of Nehemiah, we read numerous occasions where Nehemiah kept calling the people back to prayer, kept coming back to praying, kept coming to keep our eyes fixed on him and what he is doing and what he wants for us. So church, individuals, whatever it is that God is challenging you to do, keep on praying. Our time is gone. We're going to move now into a period of communion. But as we do, can we just concentrate on our Lord Jesus and what he has provided for us, what he has done for us, and surrender to him as Jesus surrendered on the cross, surrender our will and our lives to him, and saying, nothing is impossible with you, Lord. Take me, do what you wish with me. May I be in your plans. May I serve you.